The wine in my glass barely rippled when my mother tapped the microphone and the room went quiet. 83 people stood in the garden of my parents' house in Scottsdale. The string lights overhead cast everything in warm gold, the kind of light that makes people look softer than they are. My mother, Patricia, stood at the portable podium my father had rented specifically for this night, wearing a cream blazer she'd bought for the occasion, looking like she was about to give a TED talk on generosity. She cleared her throat. She loved moments like this. She loved being watched. She said she had a special announcement. She said that as an engagement gift to Brooke and Derek, she wanted to give something with real meaning, something that would set them up for life. She reached into a leather portfolio and produced a stack of documents, the kind with blue binding that lawyers use when they want things to look official. She announced she was transferring the operating rights and full management authority of Solace Digital, the productivity app I had built from scratch in my apartment at 24, to Brooke and her fiancé as a wedding and business gift. The applause started before she even finished the sentence. My sister Brooke squealed. She pressed both hands over her mouth like she'd just won something on a game show. Her fiancé Derek stood up halfway from his chair, reaching across the table to squeeze my mother's hand, grinning the way men grin when they think they've just closed the deal of their careers. He looked around the room to receive the applause like it was already his. I didn't move. I held my wine glass with 2 fingers and watched the whole thing the way I watch code run. Detached, clinical, looking for the error. There wasn't one. Not in my plan, anyway. Before I tell you what Derek did in the next 20 minutes, and how his own impatience handed me the cleanest outcome I ever could have engineered myself, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I genuinely want to know how far this story travels. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old. My family has always introduced me at parties as the tech one, which is the polite way of saying they found what I did vaguely impressive but didn't fully understand it, and didn't try to. I'm a software architect by training and a founder by necessity. I built Solace Digital as a side project the year after I graduated, working from a folding table in a studio apartment in Phoenix, surviving on coffee, and the particular kind of desperation that only comes when you've already watched one version of your future disappear. The app is a workflow management tool for small legal and healthcare practices. Nothing flashy, no viral moment, no press coverage, no funding round. Just 7 years of consistent iteration, and a product that worked well enough that users paid for it, recommended it to colleagues, and renewed their subscriptions without being asked. By last year, Solace was generating just under $400,000 annually in recurring revenue. Quietly, reliably, the way good things usually work. I had formed a family LLC in the early days, partly for tax simplicity and partly because my father had asked me to, in that gentle, certain way of his that made requests feel like common sense. He said it would be easier. He said it would protect us all. I was 25 and I trusted him, so I put the operating entity in the LLC. For 3 years, my parents filed it under family assets, mentioned it casually at dinner, and my father began telling his golf partners about the software business we have. That we was the first small crack. The second crack came when Brooke's modeling career stalled, and then her lifestyle brand failed, and then her online boutique lasted 4 months before the inventory debt made her cry for 2 weekends straight. Each time, money moved. I won't say from where, because I watched enough quietly to understand the architecture of what was happening. My parents would give Brooke what she needed, and then look at me with the specific relief of people who knew one of their children would be fine on her own. I was always going to be fine on my own. That was the trap. The third crack came 8 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days before this engagement party, when my mother mentioned during a Sunday phone call that Derek had wonderful instincts for business, and that it would be so good for Brooke to have someone who understood the entrepreneurial side of things. She mentioned it the way you mention weather. Offhand. Testing whether I'd react. I didn't react. I said that sounded nice. I asked how Dad's knee was doing after his surgery. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for approximately 6 minutes. Then I called my attorney. I want to be precise about something here, because I've seen enough mismanaged situations in my professional life to know that the difference between a trap and a mistake is preparation. The LLC my parents knew about, the one my father mentioned to his golf partners, the one listed in the family financial overview my mother kept in a binder in the hall. Closet had always been a container, a holding structure. What it held was what mattered. The intellectual property behind Solace, the code base, the registered copyrights, the trademark on the name and the logo, the client contracts, the API licensing agreements, the vendor relationships. None of that had ever formally transferred to the LLC. I had licensed it, revocably, for operational purposes. My attorney confirmed what I already suspected. I could revoke that license. I could transfer every substantive asset to a new entity under my sole ownership, with full legal standing, and the LLC my parents thought contained my life's work would become a shell holding nothing but a name and an old bank account with $1,100 in it. I spent 3 weeks making sure every transfer was clean. My new holding company was called Meridian Systems LLC. I filed everything quietly. Trademark registrations, copyright certificates, contract assignments, countersigned by every client. By the time the engagement was announced and the party was planned, Meridian Systems owned every working piece of Solace Digital. The original family LLC owned the branding rights to a product it no longer had legal access to. What my mother handed Brooke and Derek at that podium was an envelope. I watched Derek scan the room after the applause died down. He wasn't looking for Brooke. He was looking for Marcus. Marcus was a venture contact Derek had been circling for 2 years. A man who moved money into small SaaS acquisitions and had a reputation for quick decisions. I knew Marcus would be here tonight because Derek had mentioned him twice in the past month. Both times in that studied, casual way. People talk about things they very much want you to notice. Derek had already been selling. He'd been selling before the ring was on my sister's finger. My mother appeared at my elbow 12 minutes after the announcement. She steered me away from the group near the bar, toward the corner of the garden where the string lights didn't quite reach. Her fingers on my arm felt like a correction rather than a touch. "You're not smiling," she said. "I'm smiling," I said. "You're doing that flat thing with your face. People will notice." I looked at her. She looked back at me with the expression I had spent 31 years trying to interpret, part love, part apology, part something harder that I no longer had a word for. She reached into the leather portfolio and slid a sheet of paper toward me. A management transfer form. My signature line was already highlighted. "You understand why we're doing this," she said. It wasn't a question. "Tell me anyway," I said. She exhaled. "You have your salary, Maya. You have your consulting contracts. You have that condo and your savings and the life you've built." She gestured vaguely in the direction of my existence. "You don't need Solace the way Brooke needs it. Derek has the connections to grow it. He knows investors. He knows the acquisition space. If they can get a real exit on this in 2 or 3 years, Brooke is set. She is finally set. So you're giving them my company to fund her stability," I said. "I'm redistributing a family asset to the family member who needs it most." Her voice was quiet and certain, the voice she used when she had already decided the conversation was over. "You've always been self-sufficient, Maya. That was never a criticism. It just means you can absorb this. Brooke cannot absorb another failure. I won't watch her absorb another failure." She pushed the pen toward me. I picked it up. "I want to do this right," I told her. "I want to make sure the documentation is complete. Can you bring Derek over? I'd like to walk through it together so there are no questions later." She looked at me for a moment. Then she relaxed. Something in her shoulders dropped. She'd been bracing for a fight and I had just declined to give her one. She patted my hand once. A gesture that felt like a receipt being stamped, and went to get Derek. He came over quickly. That's the thing about greedy people, they move fast when they think the gate is open. He shook my hand with both of his, which is the handshake of a man who has taken a seminar on seeming trustworthy. He said he was glad I was on board. He said he had a lot of respect for what I'd built. He said the word scale 3 times in 90 seconds. I asked him about Marcus. His face opened like a window. "Yes," he said. "Marcus was here. They'd already had a preliminary conversation. Marcus's team was very interested. There could be a letter of intent as early as next week. He said this the way people announce good news they've been holding for too long. Then we should get this signed tonight," I said. "So everything is clean for due diligence." He agreed immediately. "Of course. Absolutely." He picked up the pen before I even offered it, and signed his name on the acceptance line, with the focused intensity of a man who had been practicing this moment in his head for months. I countersigned as the LLC manager. My mother clasped her hands together. I excused myself to get another glass of wine. "I want to tell you about the walk back to the drink table, because it was the longest 40 feet I have crossed in recent memory. Not because I was nervous, because somewhere between the highlighted signature line and the bar cart, I had a single clear moment of something I don't talk about easily. I thought about being 22, sitting across from my mother at the kitchen table, while she explained that Brooke's modeling portfolio required a professional photographer, and the photographer required $3,000, and the $3,000 was going to come from the college savings account that had my name on it. She told me I was smart enough to find my own way. She said it like it was a compliment. I had believed her. I had spent 7 years building something real on the bones of what they took, and for a long moment standing next to a drink table in my parents' garden, I felt the specific grief of someone who had been loved less and worked harder, and still spent decades hoping the math would eventually even out. It doesn't even out. You just get better at math. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, because I wanted to be very clear-headed for the next part. Marcus and his associate were seated at a table near the back of the garden, and Derek had migrated toward them with the body language of a man who could not wait 5 more minutes. I watched from across the party. Marcus's associate, a woman in her 30s with a laptop bag, and the careful expression of someone doing real work at a social event, opened her computer. Due diligence runs on its own schedule. When you're moving money, you don't wait for the party to end. I watched her type. I watched her pause. I watched her type again. She leaned toward Marcus and said something. Marcus's expression shifted not dramatically, just a small contraction around the eyes, the look of a man whose time has been wasted before and knows immediately when it's happening again. The associate made a phone call. Derek noticed. He leaned over. She showed him the screen. I was too far away to hear his words, but I watched his face move through confusion, then insistence, then something close to panic. He pointed at the document he'd just signed. She shook her head. He looked around the party. He found me. I walked toward the table calmly. Brooke had drifted over by this point, drawn by the change in Derek's posture, standing slightly behind him with the uncertain look of someone who knows something is wrong but hasn't been given the information to understand it yet. My mother was 2 tables away, watching. "What did you do?" Derek said. His voice was low and tight. I pulled out my phone and opened my Files app. I set my phone on the table face up, where Marcus and his associate could both see the screen. The document on top was the Meridian Systems LLC formation certificate. Below it, the trademark registration for the Solace, name and logo. Below that, copyright certificates for every version of the codebase. Below that, a folder of client contract assignments, all dated 8 months ago, all countersigned. "Every productive asset in Solace Digital is owned by Meridian Systems LLC, I said, and my voice was steady in a way I had not entirely expected. "The entity you signed tonight holds the original operating name and an $1,100 bank account. It has not held any intellectual property, client contracts, or software rights for the better part of a year." Marcus's associate was already on her second call. Marcus himself had stopped pretending to be social. He was reading the documents on my phone screen with the focused attention of someone calculating a loss. "That can't be legal," Derek said. "It's entirely legal," I said. "I owned the IP personally. I licensed it to the LLC operationally. I revoked the license and transferred the assets to a new entity. My attorney documented every step. You can challenge it if you want. It will cost you more than the company is worth at this point, and you'll lose." He stood up. "You set this up," he said, louder now. "You did this on purpose." "I set it up 8 months ago," I said. "Yes." He grabbed the transfer document, the one he'd signed 20 minutes earlier, and held it in the air. "This is a binding agreement," he said. "You signed this. This is fraud." "That's a voluntary transfer of a dormant LLC," I said. "You accepted a legal entity. I never misrepresented what it contained. If your due diligence assumed it contained more than it did, that's a due diligence failure, not a fraud claim." Marcus stood quietly and excused himself. His associate closed her laptop. Derek watched them leave with an expression I recognized from debugging sessions, the exact moment when someone realizes the error isn't on the surface and cannot be quickly fixed. Brooke grabbed my arm. "Tell me what's happening," she said. Her voice was thin. "Maya, tell me what is happening right now." I turned to her and I gave her the full explanation, clearly and without cruelty, the way I would explain a system failure to a client. I told her about the LLC. I told her about Meridian. I told her about the license revocation. I told her what the company had been worth and what the empty entity Derek just accepted was worth. I told her that the man she was engaged to had known exactly what Solace generated annually because I had watched him request the financials from my father 6 weeks ago. She looked at Derek. He was staring at his phone, texting with the rapid, desperate energy of someone trying to stop water with their hands. She looked back at me. She said, "You knew he was after it." I said, "I suspected." She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Would you have believed me?" She didn't answer. That was its own answer. My mother reached us then. She was not quiet about it. She grabbed my wrist, and her voice had the sharp, carrying quality it gets when she's frightened and presenting it as anger. She said I had sabotaged my sister's future. She said I had humiliated the family in front of their friends. She said I was vindictive and selfish, and that she had given me every opportunity to simply do the right thing. I looked at her hand on my wrist. She let go. "I have protected my work," I said. "I built Solace from zero, with my own hands, on the money that was supposed to help me through college. I put it in your family structure in good faith, and I watched you claim it as yours for 3 years. I am not vindictive. I am just no longer willing to be the solution to problems I didn't create. You're going to destroy this family," she said. Her voice had lost some of its power. Underneath the anger was something older and more tired. She sounded, for the first time that night, like someone who understood that what she had done had a weight to it. I thought about saying something sharper. I had about 4 options available, and every one of them would have landed. Instead, I said, "Mom, I'm a software architect. I don't patch code that was never meant to run. I write new systems." I picked up my phone. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. I said goodnight to the 2 people nearby who caught my eye and looked vaguely sympathetic. I walked through the garden and through the side gate and down the driveway to where I'd parked on the street. Brooke caught up with me at my car. She stood on the sidewalk in her engagement party dress, her arms crossed against the night air, looking younger than 28 and also somehow older at the same time. She said she didn't know he was doing this. I told her I believed her. She asked me what she was supposed to do now. I told her I didn't know. I told her that was genuinely hers to figure out and that I hoped she figured it out clearly. I told her that the question of whether a person loves you or loves what you represent is one of the most important questions in anyone's life, and that the answer is usually obvious earlier than we let ourselves see it. She didn't say anything. I got in my car. I drove back to my condo on the other side of the city. I parked in the garage and took the elevator up and poured myself a real glass of wine and sat at my desk. The same desk where 7 years ago I started writing the first lines of code for Solace on a laptop with a cracked hinge. I pulled up the Meridian Systems dashboard. 412,000 in annual recurring revenue. 147 active clients. Renewal rate of 91%. I opened my phone. I removed myself from the family group chat. I moved my parents' numbers to a contact group called Do Not Answer for now, which felt more honest than blocking them outright and more protective than leaving things open. I thought about my mother's face in the garden, not the angry version, but the earlier version, when she slid the transfer form toward me and said I could absorb this. She had meant it as something close to a compliment. In her accounting, my ability to recover from loss was not a quality she had taken for granted. It was a quality she had factored in as a resource. That's the part that takes the longest to unknot. Not the betrayal, the logic behind it. The way people who love you can still decide that your resilience is a surplus they're entitled to draw from. I finished my wine. I opened a new project file. I had 3 new client inquiries in my inbox from the week before that I hadn't responded to yet. I started working. The apartment was quiet in the way that apartments are quiet when you've stopped waiting for a phone to ring with the right kind of call. It wasn't an empty quiet. It was the quiet of a space that belongs entirely to you, where nothing on the walls or in the drawers or in the infrastructure of your daily life exists because someone else needed it to. I had built this, specifically, deliberately, from scraps. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, every single piece of it was mine.